The silence in the Delta Force briefing room was deafening. 30 of America's most elite soldiers sat frozen, their eyes fixed on the raised sleeve that had just changed everything they thought they knew about their new commanding officer. General Marcus Kane stood at the front of the room, his weathered face a mask of controlled fury. The tattoo that stretched across his forearm wasn't just ink on skin. It was a map of hell itself, etched in black and red, telling a story that would make these hardened warriors question everything they believed about courage, sacrifice, and the true cost of war. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Let me tell you how it all began. Just 48 hours earlier, when these same Delta Force operators thought they were untouchable, invincible, and above everyone else who had ever worn the uniform. Tuesday, 0600 hours, Fort Bragg, North Carolina. Staff Sergeant Jake Razor Morrison spat into the dirt as he watched the black sedan pull up to the Delta Force compound. The morning sun caught the dust motes dancing in the air, but Jake's attention was locked on the figure stepping out of the vehicle. Well, 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 Jake muttered to his teammate Sergeant Mike Bulldog Chen, who was bench pressing 315 pounds like it was a warm-up weight. Look what the Pentagon dragged in. General Marcus Kane emerged from the sedan with the kind of measured precision that immediately marked him as either very dangerous or completely out of his depth. At 52, he carried himself with the bearing of a man who had seen things that would break lesser minds. But to the Delta Force operators watching from the shadows, he looked like just another desk jockey playing soldier. Guy looks soft, Bulldog grunted, racking the weight with a metallic clang that echoed across the compound. Bet he's never been in a real firefight. Jake nodded, his scarred hands automatically checking his sidearm, a habit born from 3 tours in Afghanistan and 2 in Iraq. Command's probably trying to babysit us again. Send in another political appointee to make sure we play nice with the politicians. The whispers spread through the compound like wildfire. By 0630, every operator in Delta Force knew about their new CO. By 0700, the jokes had started. By 0800, the betting pool was already at 500. How long would it take for the pretty boy general to wash out and return to his comfortable Pentagon office? What none of them knew was that General Kane had specifically requested this assignment. And he had his reasons. Reasons that would soon turn their world upside down. The first official meeting was set for 0900 in the main briefing room. Jake arrived early, as was his habit, and found several of his teammates already there, their conversations dying to murmurs as more operators filed in. The Delta Force was America's most secretive military unit, officially known as 1st Special Forces Operational Detachment Delta. These weren't just soldiers. They were surgical instruments of warfare, men who could infiltrate a terrorist compound in the dead of night and eliminate high-value targets without leaving a trace. They had earned their arrogance through blood, sweat, and countless missions where failure meant death. $10 says he starts with some speech about honor and duty, whispered Tommy Ghost Rodriguez, a sniper whose kill count was classified but legendary. 20 says he mentions his West Point education, added Marcus Tank Williams, whose 6'4" frame was covered in scars from an IED explosion in Fallujah. Jake was about to respond when the door opened and General Kane walked in. The room fell silent, but it wasn't the respectful silence of soldiers greeting their commanding officer. It was the predatory quiet of wolves sizing up their prey. Kane moved to the front of the room with that same measured precision Jake had noticed earlier. He wore standard ACUs with no visible decorations except for his rank insignia and basic qualification badges. No combat infantry badge, no Bronze Star, no Purple Heart. To the operators, this was proof positive that their new CO was exactly what they'd suspected, a career politician in uniform. "Gentlemen," Kane began, his voice carrying easily across the room without seeming to strain. "I know what you're thinking. Do you now?" Jake muttered under his breath, earning a few suppressed chuckles from his teammates. Kane's eyes found Jake's across the room, and for a moment, Jake felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Uncertainty. There was something in the general's gaze that didn't match the soft Pentagon image they'd constructed. "You're wondering what a desk jockey like me is doing commanding America's most elite fighting force," Kane continued, seemingly unbothered by the hostile atmosphere. "You're looking at my uniform and wondering where the combat decorations are. You're thinking that I've never been in an aerial fight, never had bullets flying over my head, Never had to make the kind of life and death decisions that you make every day. The room was silent now, but it was a different kind of silence. Kane had their attention. And you know what? You're absolutely right to wonder about those things. In your position, I'd be wondering the same thing. This wasn't going according to script. The operators exchanged glances, unsure how to respond to a commanding officer who seemed to be agreeing with their doubts about him. Kane walked closer to the seated soldiers, his hands clasped behind his back. But here's what I want you to understand. I didn't ask for this assignment because I needed another star on my shoulder. I didn't take this job because the Pentagon thought you needed a babysitter. He paused directly in front of Jake's row, his eyes scanning the faces of the most dangerous soldiers in the American military. I took this job because 18 months ago, one of my closest friends, a man who served his country for 27 years, put a gun to his head and pulled the trigger. And his last words to me were about a mission that officially never happened, involving operators who officially don't exist. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Kane had just referenced something that every Delta Force operator knew about but never discussed. The black operations that didn't appear in any official record. The missions that pushed the boundaries of what civilized nations were supposed to do in warfare. So before you decide that I don't belong here, Kane continued, before you conclude that I'm just another Pentagon paper pusher who doesn't understand what you do, maybe you should ask yourselves why a general with a spotless record would voluntarily walk into a hornet's nest like this. He turned to face the entire room, his expression hardening, because I can guarantee you that whatever you think you know about me, whatever assumptions you've made about my background, you're wrong, dead wrong. The lunch conversation was subdued, but the undercurrent of skepticism remained. Kane's speech had been unsettling, but it was still just words. These were men who judged each other by actions, by what they'd done when the bullets started flying and their brothers in arms needed them most. Guy talks a good game, Bulldog said between bites of his sandwich, but talk is cheap. Maybe, Jake replied, but he was remembering the look in Kane's eyes when he'd mentioned his friend's suicide. There had been something there, pain maybe, or anger. It was hard to tell which. You thinking of switching sides, Razor? Ghost asked with a grin. Getting soft on the new CO? Hell no, Jake shot back quickly. But something about this doesn't add up. You don't get to be a general by being stupid, and you don't volunteer for this kind of assignment unless you've got a reason. Maybe he's investigating us, Tank suggested, looking for evidence of unauthorized operations or rule violations. The possibility hung in the air like smoke. Every operator in that room had bent or broken rules in the field. It was the nature of their work. Sometimes you had to choose between following regulations and completing the mission. Between protocol and keeping your team alive. If that's what this is, Jake said quietly, then we've got bigger problems than just a new Kane had scheduled individual meetings with each team leader, starting with the senior NCOs. Jake was called in at 1400, and he approached the general's temporary office with the same caution he'd use when entering a potentially hostile building. Kane looked up from a stack of personnel files as Jake entered. Staff Sergeant Morrison, have a seat. Jake remained standing. I'll stand, sir. Suit yourself. Kane leaned back in his chair, studying Jake with those unsettling eyes. 28 years old, born in Detroit, enlisted at 18 after your father was killed in a construction accident. 3 tours in Afghanistan, 2 in Iraq, joined Delta Force 4 years ago. 17 confirmed kills, though I suspect the real number is higher. Jake kept his face neutral, but internally he was processing the fact that Kane had clearly done his homework. Silver Star for actions in Kandahar, Bronze Star with V device for actions in Mosul, Purple Heart for wounds received during operation. Kane paused, looking at the file. Well, I can't read the operation name because it's been redacted. Is there a point to this, sir? Jake asked. The point, Staff Sergeant, is that I know exactly who you are and what you've done. And I know that you and your teammates think I'm some Pentagon suit who's never been in combat. Kane closed the file and stood up, walking to the window that overlooked the training area. What I'm curious about is whether you're going to let that assumption guide your judgment, or whether you're going to wait and see what I'm actually capable of. With respect, sir, in our line of work, assumptions can get you killed. We judge people by their actions, not their words. Kane turned back to face Jake, and there was something that might have been approval in his expression. Good answer. In that case, you won't mind if I join you for tomorrow's training exercise? Jake felt a moment of surprise. Sir? Your team is running a hostage rescue simulation at 0600 tomorrow. I'd like to participate. General, with all due respect, this isn't an observation exercise. This is full contact training. Live ammunition, flashbangs, the works. It's not appropriate for a desk jockey. Kane's voice carried a hint of amusement. Don't worry, Staff Sergeant. I'll try to keep up. Wednesday, 4:0545 hours. Training facility. Jake arrived at the training facility 15 minutes early, as was his habit. He was surprised to find General Kane already there, suited up in full tactical gear. But it wasn't the gear that caught Jake's attention. It was how Kane wore it. The general's equipment was set up with the kind of precision that came from years of muscle memory. His weapon was positioned for a right-handed quick draw. His magazines were arranged for tactical reloads, and his body armor showed the kind of wear patterns that came from actual field use, not training exercises. Morning, Staff Sergeant, Kane said as Jake approached. Morning, sir. You sure you want to do this? Kane checked his sidearm with movements that were both economical and professional. I'm sure. The rest of the team arrived over the next 10 minutes, and Jake could see the surprise on their faces as they took in Kane's appearance. This wasn't what they'd expected from their new CO. All right, listen up, Jake called out. Today's scenario is a hostage rescue. We've got 3 civilians held in a mock compound with an unknown number of hostiles. Rules of engagement are standard. Positive identification before you shoot, watch your backdrop, and remember that one of the hostages is a child. He looked at Kane. General, you'll be with Bulldog and Ghost on the support team. Your job is to provide covering fire and watch for squirters trying to escape. Kane nodded. Understood. One more thing, Jake added, his voice taking on a harder edge. This isn't a training exercise where we slow down for VIPs. If you can't keep up, you'll get left behind. If you make a mistake, you'll get people killed. Understood? Crystal clear, Staff Sergeant. The simulated compound was a maze of concrete walls and narrow corridors, designed to replicate the kind of urban environment where Delta Force operators often found themselves. Hidden speakers played background noise, distant traffic, barking dogs, the occasional shout in Arabic, to add realism to the exercise. Jake's team moved with the fluid precision of predators, each man knowing instinctively where his teammates were and what they were doing. They communicated through hand signals and brief radio calls, their movements coordinated by years of training and combat experience. Kane, positioned with the support team on an overlooking building, was supposed to provide overwatch and call out any threats that the assault team might miss. It was the kind of job typically given to new team members or, in this case, visiting officers who needed to be kept out of the way. The exercise began smoothly. Jake's team breached the outer perimeter and began clearing rooms methodically. The role players acting as hostiles put up realistic resistance, forcing the operators to adapt their approach as they moved through the building. Then something went wrong. Contact left! Ghost's voice crackled over the radio as simulated gunfire erupted from an unexpected direction. The training scenario had just become significantly more complicated. Jake's team was caught in a crossfire, pinned down by hostile fire from 2 directions. They needed covering fire from the support team to extract themselves from the kill zone, but from his position, Jake couldn't see where the threats were coming from. Overwatch, I need eyes on the northeast corner, Jake called out. Kane's voice came back over the radio, calm and professional. 2 hostiles northeast corner, 2nd floor window. 3rd hostile moving to flank you from the alley on your 6. Roger, taking them now, Ghost replied, but his position didn't give him a clear shot at the flanking hostile. Negative, Kane's voice cut in. I've got the flanker. What happened next would be talked about in the Delta Force compound for years to come. Kane moved from his overwatch position with a speed and fluidity that none of the operators had expected. He cleared a 12-foot gap between buildings with a leap that spoke of countless hours of parkour training, rolled upon landing to absorb the impact, and came up with his weapon ready. The simulated gunfire that followed was precise and controlled. 3 quick bursts, 3 targets down. But it wasn't just the accuracy that impressed the watching operators. It was the tactical movement, the way Kane had positioned himself to eliminate the threat while avoiding potential friendly fire incidents. Threats neutralized, Kane reported. his breathing barely elevated despite having just completed a maneuver that would have challenged operators half his age. The exercise concluded successfully, but the mood among the team was different as they gathered for the after-action review. They had just witnessed something that didn't fit their preconceptions about their new commanding officer. "Not bad for a desk jockey," Bulldog muttered, but there was respect in his voice now. Jake found himself studying Kane with new eyes. The general's tactical movement had been textbook perfect, but it was the kind of perfection that came from experience, not classroom instruction. "Where did you learn to move like that, sir?" Ghost asked. Kane was cleaning his weapon with the same methodical precision he'd shown throughout the exercise. "Here and there," he replied noncommittally. It wasn't much of an answer, but it was enough to plant seeds of doubt about their assumptions. If Kane was just a Pentagon bureaucrat, where had he learned to fight like a special operations soldier? Jake sat on his bunk, staring at his laptop screen. He'd been trying to find information about General Kane's background for the past 2 hours, but the man's service record was frustratingly vague. Kane had attended West Point, graduated with honors, and received his commission as a second lieutenant in the Army. From there, his career path seemed to follow a traditional trajectory: various staff positions, command assignments, and steady promotions, but there were gaps, periods of time where his assignments were either classified or listed as attached to Joint Special Operations Command. JSOC was the umbrella organization that oversaw all of America's special operations forces, including Delta Force. If Kane had been attached to JSOC, it would explain his tactical skills, but it would also mean that his background was far more complex than his personnel file indicated. A knock on the door interrupted his research. "Come in." Bulldog entered, carrying 2 cups of coffee. "Thought you might need some caffeine. You've been staring at that screen for hours." "Just doing some research on our new CO." Bulldog sat on the opposite bunk. "Find anything interesting?" "That's the problem. I'm not finding much of anything. Kane's service record reads like a standard officer's career path, but there are too many gaps, too many classified assignments." "Maybe that's the point," Bulldog suggested. "Maybe his real background is classified above our pay grade." Jake considered this. In the world of special operations, classification levels went far beyond what most people understood. There were programs and operations that were so compartmentalized that even senior officers might not have access to information about them. "What did you think of his performance today?" Jake asked. Bulldog was quiet for a moment. "Honestly, he moved like one of us. Not like an officer trying to prove himself, but like someone who's been in the shit before." "That's what I was thinking too." "So what do we do? Keep treating him like an outsider, or give him the benefit of the doubt?" It was a good question, and Jake didn't have an easy answer. In their line of work, trust was earned through shared combat experience. But if Kane had that experience and it was simply classified, then they might be making a serious mistake in their assessment of him. "I think we watch and wait," Jake finally said. "See what else he reveals about himself. And if he doesn't reveal anything?" Jake closed his laptop and looked at his teammate. "Then we'll find out the hard way, won't we?" Thursday, 0800 hours. Briefing room. Kane had called for a full team briefing, and the atmosphere in the room was different from their first meeting. The hostility was still there, but it was tempered now by uncertainty and a grudging respect for the general's tactical abilities. "Gentlemen," Kane began, "I want to talk to you about why I'm really here." The room fell silent. This was what they'd been waiting for, the real reason behind Kane's assignment to Delta Force. 6 months ago, a Delta Force team was deployed to Syria on a classified mission. The operation was a success by all official measures. The targets were eliminated, the team extracted without casualties, and the mission was written up as another victory in the war on terror. Kane paused, his eyes scanning the room. But 3 weeks after that team returned, one of the operators, a staff sergeant with 12 years of service and 2 Purple Hearts, walked into his garage, started his motorcycle, and sat there until the carbon monoxide killed him. The silence in the room was deafening. Suicide among special operations personnel was a topic that everyone knew about, but rarely discussed openly. 2 weeks after that, another member of the same team was found dead in his apartment, needle still in his arm. The official cause was accidental overdose, but the man had never used drugs before in his life. Jake felt a chill run down his spine. He was beginning to understand where this was going. A month later, the team leader, a man I'd served with for 15 years, called me at 3 a.m. He was drunk, crying, and talking about things that didn't make sense. About orders that contradicted everything we'd been taught about the laws of war, about decisions that kept him awake at night. Kane's voice hardened. The next morning, he put his service pistol to his head and pulled the trigger. He left a note, but it was classified by JSOC before his wife ever saw it. The weight of Kane's words settled over the room like a funeral shroud. Everyone present understood the implications. If an entire Delta Force team had been affected by whatever had happened on that mission, it suggested something far worse than ordinary combat stress. That team was designated Echo 7, Kane continued. And the reason I'm here is because I've been tasked with investigating what really happened on their final mission. Tank spoke up from the back of the room. Sir, with all due respect, why tell us this? If you're investigating JSOC operations, we're hardly objective observers. Kane turned to face him. Because Echo 7's mission was authorized by the same command structure that oversees your operations. Because the same officers who briefed them are still in positions of authority. And because there's a very real possibility that what happened to Echo 7 could happen to any team in this room. The implications were staggering. Kane wasn't just investigating a single mission. He was suggesting that there might be systematic problems within the Special Operations Command structure. What kind of mission are we talking about, sir? Jake asked. Kane was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. The kind of mission that officially never happened. The kind that involves executive authority and plausible deniability. The kind that makes you question everything you thought you knew about the difference between the good guys and the bad guys. After the briefing, Kane had dismissed the team, but Jake found himself unable to concentrate on routine tasks. The General's revelations had opened up questions that went to the heart of everything Delta Force represented. He was walking past the secure communications room when he heard raised voices coming from inside. The door was partially open, and through the gap, he could see Kane speaking on a secure telephone, his face flushed with anger. I told you I need access to those files. Kane was saying, I don't give a damn about classification levels. 3 good soldiers are dead, and I'm not going to let their deaths be covered up by bureaucratic bullshit. There was a pause while Kane listened to whoever was on the other end of the line. Don't threaten me, Colonel, Kane continued, his voice dangerously quiet. I've got enough on half the JSOC command staff to end careers and possibly put people in prison. All I want is the truth about what happened to Echo 7. Another pause. Fine. But understand this. If I don't get cooperation from the official channels, I'll find other ways to get the information I need. And you won't like the methods I use. Kane slammed the phone down, and Jake quickly moved away from the door, his mind racing. Whatever Kane was investigating, it was big enough to put him in conflict with his own superiors. And if the General was willing to buck the JSOC command structure, it meant he was either very confident in his position or very desperate. Neither possibility was particularly reassuring. Jake was working out alone in the gymnasium, trying to process everything he'd learned about Kane when the General entered. Kane was dressed in PT gear, and Jake noticed that his build was more muscular than his uniform had suggested. Mind if I join you? Kane asked. It's your base, sir. Kane moved to the free weights and began warming up with a routine that spoke of years of disciplined physical training. They worked out in silence for several minutes before Kane finally spoke. You heard my phone conversation this afternoon, didn't you? Jake paused mid-rep, unsure how to respond. Kane had made it a statement, not a question. I wasn't eavesdropping, sir. I know you weren't. But you heard enough to know that this investigation isn't popular with the brass. Kane finished his set and turned to face Jake directly. I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer honestly. If you discovered that your superiors had ordered your team to do something that violated everything you believed about honor and duty, what would you do? It was a hell of a question, and Jake took his time considering it. Depends on what they ordered us to do, I guess. Let's say they ordered you to eliminate someone who wasn't a combatant, someone who had information that could embarrass the government, but who hadn't actually committed any crimes. Jake felt his stomach tighten. That would be murder, sir. Yes, it would. And if you refused the order? They'd court-martial me. Probably charge me with disobeying orders and conduct unbecoming. And if you followed the order? Jake was quiet for a long moment. Then I'd have to live with it for the rest of my life. Kane nodded grimly. That's the choice Echo 7 was given. And I think it's the choice that destroyed them. Kane had requested that Jake come to his office for what he called a confidential discussion. Jake arrived to find the general studying a map of Syria, red pins marking various locations. Close the door, Staff Sergeant. Jake complied and took a seat across from Kane's desk. What I'm about to tell you is classified above your current clearance level, Kane began. But I need someone I can trust, and based on your record and my observations, I think you might be that person. Sir, if this is classified, it's classified because it's embarrassing, not because it's dangerous to national security, Kane interrupted. Echo 7's final mission involved eliminating a Syrian intelligence officer who had been feeding information to the CIA for 3 years. Jake felt his blood run cold. We killed one of our own assets? Not exactly. The asset had started asking questions about certain CIA operations that some very powerful people didn't want exposed, so the decision was made to eliminate him and make it look like a terrorist attack. The implications were staggering. If Kane was telling the truth, then Echo 7 had been used as assassins to cover up CIA operations that might have been illegal or unauthorized. How do you know all this, sir? Kane pulled out a thick file folder and set it on the desk between them. Because the team leader called me the night before he killed himself. He told me everything. Jake stared at the folder, knowing that whatever was inside it would change his understanding of how the war on terror really operated. Why are you telling me this? Because I think there are more missions like this one. I think Echo 7 wasn't an isolated incident, but part of a pattern of operations that use Special Forces personnel to clean up messes that the intelligence community creates. Kane leaned back in his chair, his expression grim, and I think whoever is authorizing these missions is planning to use Delta Force for similar operations in the future. Jake was running combat drills with his team, but his mind kept returning to his conversation with Kane. The idea that special operations personnel were being used as political assassins was almost too horrible to contemplate. But it would explain the psychological destruction of Echo 7. Razor, you okay? Ghost called out. You seem distracted. Just thinking about some things, Jake replied. Want to talk about it? Jake looked around at his teammates, men he'd fought beside, men he'd trust with his life. If Kane was right, they might all be facing the kind of moral choices that had destroyed Echo 7. Later, he said, let's finish the drill first. But even as they went through the motions of their training, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that their world was about to change in ways they couldn't imagine. Kane had suggested that Jake meet him off base for lunch, citing the need for privacy. They sat in a corner booth at a small diner, speaking in low voices while keeping an eye on the other customers. I've been thinking about our conversation yesterday, Jake said, and I have some questions. Go ahead. If you know about these illegal operations, why haven't you reported it through official channels? Kane smiled grimly. Who do you think I would report it to? The JSOC commander who authorized the missions? The Pentagon officials who signed off on the operations? The CIA directors who requested the eliminations? The scope of the corruption Kane was suggesting was mind-boggling. Are you saying this goes all the way to the top? I'm saying that the line between legitimate special operations and political assassination has become so blurred that nobody seems to know where one ends and the other begins. Kane leaned forward, his voice dropping even lower. And I'm saying that unless someone stops it, more teams like Echo 7 are going to be destroyed by missions that violate everything we swore to protect. What do you need from me? I need eyes and ears inside Delta Force. If new missions come down that seem questionable, I need to know about them. If your team receives orders that don't feel right, I need you to tell me before you carry them out. Jake considered this. Kane was essentially asking him to spy on his own unit, to potentially violate the chain of command if he discovered operations that might be illegal. And if I find something, then we'll figure out how to stop it. Jake arrived at the briefing room to find the entire Delta Force team assembled, along with several officers he didn't recognize. Kane stood at the front of the room, his expression grim. Gentlemen, we've received a priority mission tasking, Kane announced. 48 hours ago, A high-value terrorist target was located in a compound in eastern Syria. Intelligence indicates that this individual has been planning attacks against American interests in the region. Jake felt his pulse quicken. After their conversations about Echo 7, any new mission involving Syria immediately raised red flags. The target is a Syrian national named Khalil Hassan, Kane continued. According to intelligence reports, he's been coordinating with Iranian operatives to plan attacks on American bases in Iraq. A photograph appeared on the briefing screen, a middle-aged man with a graying beard, wearing civilian clothes. Mission parameters are standard elimination. Infiltrate the compound, eliminate the target, and extract without detection. Timeline is 72 hours. Jake studied the photograph, noting something that bothered him about the target's appearance. Hassan looked more like a professor than a terrorist. Soft hands, expensive clothes, the kind of physique that came from years behind a desk rather than training camps. "Sir?" Tank spoke up from the back of the room. "What's the source of this intelligence?" One of the unknown officers, a CIA type, Jake guessed, stepped forward. "That's classified, but I can assure you that the source is reliable." Jake caught Kane's eye and saw something there. A warning, maybe, or confirmation of his own suspicions. "Any questions?" Kane asked. Jake raised his hand. "Sir, what's the collateral damage assessment for this target?" "Minimal," the CIA officer replied. "Hassan lives alone, no family in the compound." It was a textbook answer, but something about the way it was delivered made Jake's skin crawl. "All right, gentlemen," Kane said. "Mission briefing is at 1400 hours. Be ready to deploy at 600 tomorrow." As the room emptied, Jake lingered, hoping for a private word with Kane. The general noticed and gestured for him to stay. "What are you thinking, Staff Sergeant?" Kane asked once they were alone. "I'm thinking this feels a lot like the kind of mission you've been warning me about." Kane nodded grimly. "So am I. Which is why I need you to be very careful about how this operation is conducted." The detailed mission briefing revealed even more troubling aspects of the operation. The compound where Hassan was supposedly hiding was located in an area of Syria that was technically under government control, meaning that any American military action there would be a violation of Syrian sovereignty. More concerning was the extraction plan, which called for the team to eliminate all witnesses and destroy any evidence of their presence. It was the kind of operation that left no loose ends, and no way to verify whether the intelligence had been accurate. "Sir," Ghost asked during the briefing, "what's our ROE if we encounter Syrian government forces?" "Avoid contact if possible," Kane replied. "Eliminate if necessary to complete the mission." The answer sent a chill through the room. They were being authorized to kill Syrian soldiers who were legally defending their own territory. After the briefing, Jake's team gathered in their equipment room to prepare their gear. The conversation was subdued, and Jake could sense that he wasn't the only one who had concerns about the mission. "Something about this doesn't feel right," Bulldog muttered as he checked his rifle. "Yeah," Tank agreed. "Since when do we operate in government-controlled territory without some kind of diplomatic cover?" Jake looked around at his teammates, men he'd served with for years. He thought about Echo 7, about the choices that had destroyed them, and about Kane's warning that similar missions might be coming to Delta Force. What if this Hassan isn't actually a terrorist? Jake asked quietly. The question hung in the air like a live grenade. "What do you mean?" Ghost asked. "I mean, what if he's like the Syrian asset that Echo 7 was sent to eliminate? What if this is another cleanup operation disguised as a counter-terrorism mission?" His teammates stared at him, the implications sinking in. "That's a hell of an accusation, Razor," Tank said. "It's not an accusation. It's a question, and I think we better find out the answer before we pull that trigger." Jake found Kane in his quarters, studying satellite photographs of the target compound. The general looked up as Jake entered, and there was something in his expression that suggested he'd been expecting this visit. "Having second thoughts about the mission, Staff Sergeant?" "Having thoughts, period. Which seems to be more than the brass wants from us." Kane gestured to a chair. "Talk to me." Jake sat down, choosing his words carefully. "This Hassan character, have you looked into his background beyond what the CIA provided?" "What makes you think I should?" "Because everything about this mission feels like the Echo 7 operation you described. Foreign asset who might have information that embarrasses someone important, Elimination order that comes with authorization to kill witnesses. Extraction plan that leaves no evidence behind. Kane was quiet for a moment, then pulled out a laptop computer. As a matter of fact, I have been doing some research on Mr. Hassan. He turned the screen so Jake could see.